Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. So guys, the FJ Cruiser that we looked at a few weeks back, maybe a few months back, depends when this video comes out, is back. We are doing the front wheel bearings. Now, I want to say one thing. The FJ Cruiser is basically a Tacoma or 4Runner that is shortened. So this wheel bearing process actually is the same for the 4Runner, same for the Tacoma. Majority of the years, fourth generation, fifth generation, 4Runners, they're all the same wheel bearing. Same thing with the Tacomas. This is a very common style wheel bearing. It's a little bit odd, so we're going to replace the whole thing. We're actually going to press one on and then install it on the truck, and you'll see the whole process. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos if you are a returning subscriber. Well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos, and without further ado, let's get to work. So the first thing we're going to do here is prep the bearing. And I do have a bearing that I already prepped, so we're going to use that as reference for you. This is the full hub and bearing. But in reality, if you buy this aftermarket, it'll come like this. Don't recommend it, but that's up to you. But if you buy it original, like we have here, this is actually an original bearing, it's going to come in bits and pieces. Don't know why they did this, but that's how Toyota rolls. So, we have the bearing first. Let's pull out the bearing. The bearing actually comes separate from everything else. They're not pressed. Here is that bearing. You got the magnetic side. This is where the speed sensor picks off of. And then this is where the hub is going to press on. But a very common mistake I see when people press these bearings is there's actually a seal here that seals this area of the bearing so you don't have dust and debris getting in here. Here's how that seal looks like. Here's how that seal looks like. I've seen so many videos online, watching, just curious what people are doing with these bearings. And I never see this seal. So many videos, this seal just doesn't exist. And you don't put the seal on, you already condemned this bearing for early failure. It's a very few bucks, not really an expensive seal or anything, but just most people don't know about them. Then we have our hub, and here's how that looks like. Here's the hub, just nothing really special about it. This presses on here once the seal is on, of course. But something that, when I say not the greatest idea from Toyota, bad engineering, I don't know what you want to call it. So the bolts that bolt the bearing to the knuckle in the car, which you're going to see that when we take it out, the bolts do not come out. They don't have enough space to come out. So you have a few options. You either take your old bearing and actually get a cutoff wheel, cut the ears off to get this rusty old bolt out. Or what I actually recommend is just spend a few more bucks and buy the bolts. They're really not any special bolts, just readily available. Most dealerships that have all the setup will have these bolts, but you have to remember to put them on before you press the hub. Because once you press the hub, you have no way of getting these in here, and at that point, you have to press the hub back out again and you will destroy the bearing. So these are the little engineers' traps that they have set up for us. That's just how this works. So we're going to start with installing the seal first, put the bolts, and then we're going to press the hub on here. So to install the seal, you can go and spend a small fortune on a special tool that goes around here and pushes the seal in. Or here is what happens in the real world. You're going to first just kind of seat the seal in, and then we're going to get a brass drift. This is brass. It's really soft, so it doesn't damage the seal. And we're going to start driving it in slowly. So what you want to arrive at the end is that the seal is sitting flat here the gap, there's a little gap that stays. You want this gap to be even all across. Now that we've gotten that installed, before we forget, let's put our bolts. But when you're pressing this, things will be flying everywhere, and these bolts have a tendency to fall. So here's a little trick for this. Let's flip the bearing. We're going to grab small zip ties and put them on here. That's it. This bolt's not going anywhere now. Let's do the same for all four. There we go. These are not going anywhere now, and now we can press our hub in and not have to worry about these bolts falling out. So the tool I'm using to press this is the OTC hub grappler. That's the name of the tool. Not exactly a DIY tool. What I recommend to you do if you want to do this, take it to a shop. They'll charge you a few bucks and press it in for you. That's the easiest, but I'll still show you how it is pressed. Now, for those that are familiar with the OTC hub grappler, you're actually not supposed to do this with it, but it works. So we're gonna do it. It's basically a press, so it works basically the same way, and we're gonna use it in that fashion. There you go. So the idea of pressing hubs into bearings is that you want to support the back of the bearing right here. So when you start pushing this hub, it doesn't pull the guts out of the bearing this way, it holds it. But you want to be careful with the magnetic ring that you're not holding the back of the bearing on it, because you could crack it and damage it, and then we're done. At this point, we're basically going to start hammering this thing together, just tightening this bolt, and this will press the whole thing together. So let's do that. It will be very noisy, so I'll try to lower the noise in the editing. There. There we go. Well, there we have it, folks. The first thing you do when you press a bearing is make sure it spins. Make sure your hub is seated here. Make sure you didn't pop the bearing out, which that didn't happen here, so life's good. The ring is not damaged. So now we have the two twins ready to be installed in the car, so let's go ahead and do that. So, removing the bearing. We want to take the brakes out first. In order to do that, you want to remove the line. It's just like a little Lego. A little clip here. There's that. You got a 10mm bolt here for the speed sensor wire. You got a 12mm here for the brake line. Our speed sensor wire is free. Now we're going to take our caliper off. Let's take our caliper off. Well, let's hang our caliper with a bungee cord. Here, brakes are good. They're original, actually. Factory original. They're pink in color. That's safe and secure and out of our way. Let's take the rotor off. Now we have a small process, which is taking this cap off. Again, watching videos just to see what people are doing here. So many people damage this cap. You don't want to damage it. You don't want it to open up where it's letting water in and that's going to start corroding things. It's not the end of the world if that happens, but If you do end up damaging it, do plan to get one, especially if you live in the Rust Belt and whatnot, because you'll see how clean things are behind this. Now, this bearing is original to this car. It's not a very rusty car, but they tend to seize up. So here's the best way we found doing these pretty regularly. Get a really, really sharp chisel. If your chisel is not sharp, you want to sharpen it. I've just sharpened this one. You're going to put it, and I'm going to hammer it. The chisel will start to spread, but there's a point where you're going to see this starts bending down. As soon as you see that, move the bearing and start another spot. Don't bend it down enough or now you create a gap. So let's give this a shot. And there's something unique about these. When you get to the point where it's actually starting to separate, it'll make such a loud noise that your ears will start ringing. So if you have sensitive ears and you're not deaf like me, do wear ear protection for this one. Let's give it a shot. See if this one cooperates easily. As soon as it starts bending, move away, try another spot. Eventually you'll get it. This will take a little bit of patience to get it. There we go. Once you got it to this point, just kind of move around, open it up. There it goes. That's the cap, not damaged, not mangled up, and that's the easiest way to take it out. Here's a chisel again, very sharp chisel. This is a snap-on chisel. You do want a good chisel, not one that's bad metal that'll just start mangling up. And the reason we pop this cap off is the axle goes through and it tightens right here. So we do want to loosen the axle before we pop the bearing out. So let's take our cotter pin out. This cotter pin never really gets rusty. Can you see how clean this thing is here? So you're going to end up reusing it. If you want to replace it, that's up to you. Now we got the cotter pin and the little cap here. Let's take the axle nut, and this is a 35 millimeter for some reason. So let's go ahead and take it out. Now in 99.9% of the cases, your axle will be stuck to the splines. You can hammer it here, but do not use a metal hammer. Use a rubber mallet. It's going to be very hard. A couple tricks you can do if you don't have an air hammer, which I'm going to use here. You can put a punch right in the center and then tap it to loosen it. In my case, I'm just going to use an air hammer with a chisel bit. I'm going to go right in the middle. There it is. That's it. This axle now is loose. Now we move on to taking the bearing out. So you got 4 17 millimeter bolts, the ones you saw when we pressed it in. You're gonna use a wrench just like this. This is a long gear wrench just to loosen them. Let's loosen all 4. They're not extremely tight. That's the other thing. I'd have to move the hub out of the way to be able to install your wrench. Now that we got them loose, show you a little trick without using like a hub shocker or none of these fancy tools. Something that really works. You're gonna loosen your bolts just to a point where they have good clearance. I think that's good. They're still attached, but here's what we will do to actually get the bearing out. So there are many ways to get this bearing out. At all times, make sure your axle is moving, because if you get stuck on it, it's going to give you a hard time. The rustier the struck is, the harder this bearing will be to break free from the knuckle. You can use a hub shocker where you're going to attach it here and start hammering out. That actually never works on Toyota bearings. It will rip your arm out and you'll be fighting it for a while. And we were trying to do this DIY. We're not trying to buy all the shop equipment you need. At that point, you might as well just take it to a mechanic and have him do it. But here's a trick that works from the Toyota dealership. Take a hammer, and we're going to try to walk this bearing out. And I hope this makes sense on camera. It's hard to explain. But if you try to pull this bearing out, it's seized in all directions. But if you actually twist it out, it'll actually break contact in one point and weaken the rest of the area that it's seized, and now it comes right out. So 2 ways. First, we're going to try to hit it right here. You're going to be careful with your backing plate. At some point you might hit your backing plate. Just don't forget to straighten it out. So let's give it a shot, see what happens. But you got to make sure your axle is free of the bearing. So let's try that. And you go on this side where the caliper is. That's where you got the most leverage. It's already loose. Just walk it out a little bit. You're trying to hit it a little bit here without damaging the backing plate. Now that we've gotten it a little bit out, you can see the gap right here. We're gonna take our bolts all the way out, because that's it. Bearing's ready to come out. And off she goes. Here's your bearing, folks. That's, you did not need any special tools. You did not need any of that other stuff, because you're trying to do this DIY. You're not trying to buy every single tool mechanics use. So there's the old bearing. Now, there's a few things you want to pay attention to. First one is your backing plate. If you hit it and bend it, this is the time to straighten it out. And this goes without saying, but I've seen this too many times. Remember the orientation, because you can actually install it like this. It's not a big deal. Obviously, when you go install your brakes, you're going to notice that it's backwards, but try to do this job once, because it's really not good when you install this and we realize now you got to take everything back out. So the other more important thing is this O-ring. Many people will replace it. You can reuse it if it's not damaged, and I rarely see these damaged, but I also see them always forgotten or completely missing. Well, I'll show you where this O-ring goes on the new bearing, but make sure you take it out. One thing I want you to notice before you start putting your new bearing in, this is the speed sensor right here. You look at the debris that we got going on there. That's not good. Got all kinds of stuff stuck to the bearing. Usually grease, sometimes metallic objects. So you want to make sure you give this a clean, the sensor itself, that nothing is stuck to it. On this hub, there's actually a seal in the back. You got to make sure you don't damage it by the axle, because that also seals the bearing from the other side. So our new bearing would go a little bit easier. Still won't go as smooth. We're going to want to clean this area. Just a little bit of sandpaper. And then give it a good clean. Watching for our sensor not to damage it. And we're going to give it a good wipe. Make sure we get all that debris out. The idea here is we're trying to clean a little bit. You can go all overboard. It really won't make a difference. But give it a little bit of clean and life's good. Now we're going to install our new bearing. This O-ring is going to go here. This is just a secondary to keep dust and debris out. If you're buying a new O-ring, just install it. This is the same across all these models, folks. Then you're going to put your backing plate. I usually like to put it here, push some of the bolts out. There you go. Now you're going to install it. Show your bearing and your axle spline. And this will take a little bit of, kind of start one bolt just to hold it up. And then make sure your axle is splined. There we go. You're going to start all your bolts first. Now, no matter how much you clean this, you'll never be able to get it 100% where this just slides in all the way. That's just the reality from the real world. Some people will tell you, oh, you gotta clean it. Those people don't live in the real world with rust and everything else. So here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna tighten the bolts in a crisscross pattern. When you get them run down all the way, this will slowly, and you're not gonna tighten it all the way. You're gonna tighten it a little bit, move here. You're basically moving the bearing in as we go. So you run these down. An open-end wrench makes life easier here. Some of these bolts will not move as smoothly. Because again, welcome to rusty land where nothing goes in smoothly no matter what you do to it. Okay, now that we've got them all there, they're not tight, but they're sitting against the bearing. We're gonna start. You're gonna look at where your gap is the biggest, which right now is at the bottom, back corner. Gonna give it a few turns. We're gonna come across from it, give it a few turns until it starts moving. And we're gonna go down. See, as you tighten it, these bolts will give them our final tightening. You're really hard to get a torque wrench in here, so this is where you're gonna have to use your muscle memory for torque. And here's a tip for situations, you know, like this. If you're DIY, you don't really have a muscle memory. Use the same ratchet or wrench that you used to take it off. Don't use one. If you use the giant breaker bar, use the giant breaker bar to tighten it. And whatever force you put, if you had to hang from the thing to tighten it, to loosen it, then you're gonna hang from it to tighten it. Not the most accurate thing in the world, but you know what? Sometimes you get in situations where engineer told you torque this to spec, but the engineer actually didn't actually do it himself on the car, where you don't really have space to tighten this. Now the way you can torque these to spec is there's a small adapter that goes here and pops out, and it gives you place to put your torque wrench right here. But DIY, we don't have that those fancy tools, so these are some tips I hope will help you to be able to get the torque spec at least close. Now you're going to put your axle nut back, cap. You're welcome to replace your cotter pin, but please don't use a cheapo one, or just be careful when you remove the original one and reuse it. That's actually your best bet there. With cotter pins, people put too much emphasis on how you install them and all that. The original ones, they just put the one edge over and the second out. That's it. Now we're going to install our cap. Another thing that I've noticed is people make a big deal about this. Folks, you're just going to put your cap on, take a hammer, tap it in. That's it. So you don't have any gaps. Life is great, I'd say. That was very simple. Just don't go wailing at it with a hammer and bend it. Just lightly tap it. Life is great here. We don't have any problems. One thing you want to do, if your backing plate, if you forgot to straighten it out, make sure you straighten it out. If you are in rusty land, now this truck is in rusty land, but it's actually very clean because it's been taken care of, washed regularly. If your backing plate is all rotten and rusty, you do want to get a new one, obviously before we install the bearing, but that I just wanted to say. Now we're going to go ahead and install our brakes. But one thing, once you get your rotor on, spin it and double check your backing plate, because if there is anything that's contacting, this would be the time to fix it, not later when you go for a drive and you've already put everything back together. When you're installing rotors, and this will be kind of flopping around because you have a new hub now and nothing is seized, put a lug nut on to hold it. Now that'll hold it in place. Make sure your lug nut's out of the way. Let's install our caliper back. On some models, this bolt is notorious to break, or the 10mm. If it ever breaks, drill it out. Maybe I'll make a video one day how to you guys to drill stuff out. Well, folks, at this point, we're all done with this. That's a very simple job if you know what you're heading into, and I hope this video gives you an idea of what you're going to tackle if you're doing a bearing on a Tacoma, FJ Cruiser, 4Runner. They're very common to go. Toyota did update the bearing where it lasts better, longer time. But this is very simple. It's basically nuts and bolts and hammers. That's how you deal with bearings. Well, there you have it, folks. This is a very simple Saturday morning job, actually. We're doing this bearing. You are done. I am not. I still got to put the other side because we have two bearings. I'll just do that side real quick and we're done with this job. I want you to take one thing out of this wheel bearing job. Always look at your parts, new and old. I've done this job probably hundreds of times, even more than that. If you're doing this for the first time, look at your old parts. Take the bearing out, take your time, look at everything, because that's how you miss the seal, that's how you miss the bolts that need to go in before you press it. One thing on parts. The collection of this parts, original, is a preposterous number. They're extremely expensive. The hub is very expensive. The bearing is very expensive. The seal and the bolts, not really. But aftermarket ones, you can get them, the whole thing pressed already together for the price of the hub or less. Just the hub alone will cost more than the entire aftermarket bearing. Be careful with aftermarket bearings because, for example, this truck, 15 years old, doesn't have a lot of miles, but it's 15 years old, and this is the original bearing. So you buy the new one, you expect it to last another 15 years. You buy an aftermarket one, it might last 2-3 years, if that. So kind of play that one by ear and see what you want to go with. Folks, I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of our other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.